Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Kate, what do you make of this provision as an exercise in Congress trying to restrain the executive branch? And I would just repeat that the language in this bill says that the president shall not suspend, terminate, denounce, or withdraw the United States from NATO. And if you think any law is going to prevent Donald Trump from denouncing something, I think you haven't been paying attention to Donald Trump for the last, 8 years. But then there's a section that says no funds authorized or appropriated by any act may be used to support directly or indirectly any decision on the part of the United States government official to terminate, withdraw, so forth, the United States from NATO. And so that is where Congress is putting teeth into this, saying that the president can go give a speech and say whatever he wants, but we're not going to spend any funds to take the United States out of this alliance.
Right. I mean, so Congress's core authority of power of the purse is what they're trying to use here to show that any potential president that withdrawing from NATO will be, one, very difficult, and two, have a high political cost. Now, I do think that the president has broad authority to conduct foreign policy. And George W. Bush, for instance, pulled out of the ABM treaty, and we have President Carter renegotiating the Panama Canal. There are precedents here that if there was a fight in court, which I think that there will almost certainly be, that if Trump were to actually go through with this, and remember, he makes a lot of unilateral threats and he doesn't go through with all of them, but say this actually played out, it would be fought in the courts, and I think that the executive could prevail. But nonetheless, I do think it's notable because the ability to withhold that money, to make it difficult, to slow it down, and to put it into a long, protracted political fight, it definitely would make a president think twice about going down this road, and it would definitely give Congress time to make the case to the public that the president should back down and not go through with it.
That also suggests we may end up in a situation, Kim, where the president gives a speech and says, I am withdrawing the United States from NATO. He orders the Defense Department not to respond to any NATO communiques. And Congress, meanwhile, is saying, hang on, we passed a law that says you cannot spend any money to withdraw from NATO. And that doesn't mean that Congress can force the president to give the Defense Department different orders as to how they are interacting or not interacting with NATO personnel. We may end up in a situation of limbo, kind of, where one side of the government is saying that we are still in NATO and the other side is saying that we aren't. And that would be certainly unprecedented and more than a bit odd.
It would be certainly difficult. It would be a standoff. It would be an ugly standoff. We do have these rows at times between the executive branch and the congressional branch on the expansiveness or limits on presidential power when it comes to negotiating international treaties or membership and involvement in international organizations. I do have to say the Constitution does give the executive branch some pretty sweeping powers on some of this. And we've seen, prior presidents really flex their muscles when it comes to that point, whether it was Jimmy Carter and his renegotiation of the Panama Canal, George Bush and the anti-ballistic missile treaty. So there's certainly a lot of scope for disagreement here. I agree with Kate that I think given that those limits are out there and that nobody exactly knows the contours, that the enforcement mechanism that they put in here is certainly a great start. And simply the message is a great start. You can certainly make things difficult for a president if you're going to withhold funds. Congress could go further if it wanted to take a big enough stand on this and threaten to withhold funds on other things as well if the president wasn't giving Congress what Congress views as its due respect in this regard. In some ways, it would actually be, I think, good to see that happen if it came to it, just because one of my laments watching Washington in recent years is how Congress has kind of backed away from its pride in itself as an institution and instead just formed lines around partisan things. So whatever the president says, even if the president's rolling over Congress, they all agree to be rolled over. It would be good, I think, for Congress to flex its muscle a little bit here. And that goes back to the importance of this being a bipartisan provision.
Well, I will agree with that sentiment entirely. One of the best examples in recent years, to my mind, might be President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan, because I don't think there were very many people, if any, in Congress who thought that the president had been given unilateral authority to wipe out student loans until about a week before President Biden decided to do it. And of course, you can find that famous quote of Speaker Nancy Pelosi, where she's saying it has to be an act of Congress. And then as soon as a Democratic president decided to do it, Democrats stood up and cheered, and basically becoming accomplices to a presidential assertion of authority that rightfully belongs to Congress. And so I agree with Kim that it is nice to see some exertion of Congress, of its own powers. This is how the American Constitution was designed. There is supposed to be some jostling and some friction between branches of government, because that's how checks and balances work. It is not supposed to be a game of partisan teamwork between the D's in all the branches and the R's in all the branches. And so, Kate, I guess maybe this is a good start. I would point also to the sweeping authority that Congress has delegated to the executive branch in recent years over tariff powers. And remember, we saw President Trump use that widely in his first term, including the report that was drawn up that was going to authorize national security tariffs on foreign automobile imports as a national security threat to the United States. That's another place, and I'm sure there are others, where if Congress wanted to go about this in a systematic and a bipartisan way and think, where have we as lawmakers delegated too much authority to the executive branch, and where should we take some of those powers back? I think that would be a good conversation to have.
I share your dream, Kyle, of them doing that. And trade is an example where that's much more clear cut, because to your point, unlike the issues we're just discussing in NATO, Congress abdicated its authority to the executive. And there are other areas like that. I mean, we've talked a lot on this podcast about Congress also getting some of its budget prerogatives back, that it's not just given to the executive, but it's kind of outsourced to the Congressional Budget Office and other agencies through the Budget Act. I mean, there are real areas where Congress could benefit from reasserting itself, and it's a project worth hoping for. I add just one other quick point to bring us back to the NATO discussion we were having, which is just, to your point about an adversarial branch of government, I think it is good news to see that you have a bipartisan show of support here for NATO that is going to be adversarial to a president who tries to just dump it unilaterally. I think it shows that even if a determined president could do that, I think it shows that there would be an exceedingly high political cost, and that our U.S. institutions are pretty durable and have a lot of checks packed into them that could prevent or slow down any one person from running over them.
Thank you, Kate and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.